Hey everyone, today we're at Glenwood Springs, Colorado, and we're here to see the famous grave of Doc Holliday and Kid Curry. Now this is called Linwood Cemetery, but I've also heard it called Pioneer Cemetery. And so these are the infamous residents of Linwood. We have John Henry, or Doc Holliday as he's mainly known, and then Harvey Logan, and his alias was Kid Curry. So it says, when you visit the cemetery, please keep in mind the trail to the cemetery is approximately a half a mile, moderately strenuous hike. Take water and rest frequently if needed. We're up in the mountains. As you can see, the air's a little thinner. It's not like Oklahoma or Texas or anywhere you've seen me go. And then it just has, this is bear country and stuff like that. Be mindful of the cemetery and treat it with respect. And it's just saying that Linwood Cemetery is Glenwood Springs' oldest existing cemetery and is known by several other names: Pioneer Hill, Glenwood, and Doc Holliday's. The name Linwood has been used since the cemetery's inception in 1886, although it has not yet been determined what significance it has, if any. When the first white settlers arrived and decided to make Glenwood Springs their home, they used the area of 12th Street and Palmer Avenue near this trailhead as the city's first burial ground. The land on that hill would later become Linwood Cemetery and was homesteaded in 1885. In August of 1886, Glenwood Cemetery Association was formed and Linwood Cemetery was developed. A notice appeared in the local newspaper, Ute Chief, in November 1887, advertised lots for sale in the new cemetery. So then it just says a little bit more about the cemetery. And then Mr. Lewis Swartz, a local undertaker, was named trustee of the Cemetery Association and ran the day-to-day operations. Due to health concerns raised by local doctors about bodies buried in the natural runoff zone that is now the 12th Street ditch, our city's forefathers in November of 1887 decided to move the bodies in the original burial ground to the newly formed Linwood Cemetery. So pretty interesting, a little bit of history there, and you can pause it and hear more if you'd like. And we're gonna go up that trail and see a little bit more on the cemetery. So they do have a resting area right at the entrance of the cemetery with some nice benches. I don't know what else they have through here, and we'll see as we go up. Now we're used to flat cemeteries, easy access, so having to hike up a hill to a cemetery is pretty tiring. Already out of breath, the air's a little thinner up here, but it is pretty through here. Neighborhood right over here, but it's quite a hike to the actual graves. So we are still on the trail, a little short of breath, and you can see there the trail still goes up, and that's where we came from. It's just winding around this mountain. And we were really getting up here by foot, but it's not too hot out. At least we're comparing it to Oklahoma with a high heat and high humidity, but the air is thin, so a little tiresome. Okay, so as you can see, the trail still goes up. We came across this tree with a bunch of rags on it, little pieces of material tied along here. And I don't know what for, because I do not see a sign. That's someone's mask. There's a bunch of masks on here and hats. I don't know what that means. I see beanies and a sunflower. And they have really gotten up there in that cedar tree. No, that's a pine tree. But I don't know what any of that means. If you know, leave a comment below. I even see a Batman figure right here.
Oh. Tiger.
And then some coins.
Oh, tiger.
Yeah, a little leopard over there. I have no idea. Interesting though. We're gonna keep going up this hill. We're getting close. You can see more views of the football field in the high school. Some resorts and condos and stuff. But the fence to the cemetery is in sight. So we're getting there. So this is a cemetery. There's quite a few more graves than what I thought there would be. Neat iron fences We hiked to the top, and then once you get in the cemetery, you got to hike a little bit more, kind of going downhill again. Very strange how that worked. There's a lot of older graves in here. You just keep following the signs, like that one has an arrow pointing to Doc Holliday, and it's back up the other way for Kid Curry. These are way up here though. Reminds me of the climb in Deadwood to see Seth Bullock. But at least you're seeing more together. He was pretty much up there by himself. There's a little child right here. Beulah B. Rowden, 1900 to 1912, and someone's left a little flower pot that's died. Gnomes and little kitties and bear and stuffed rabbit. It is quite a view as you look over there. See some of these graves right through here. And then Doc's is right down towards the end here. There's a sign. More graves up off in the brush over there. It's a nice little cemetery though. Got kind of a desert feel, but yet Colorado mountains. So here we are, and we have John Henry Holliday, born August 14th, 1851, and died November 8th, 1887. And it says, this memorial is dedicated to Doc Holliday, who is buried someplace in this cemetery. That's the thing, is they don't know exactly where he's buried. They lost track of where that is. There's also a long-standing rumor that his body was moved to Georgia to be buried next to his father. Although there isn't exactly real proof on that, but it is debated. Some of the items you can see in here, you can see coins, you can see shells. There is a very old Coors beer can right here. And I mean, that is really old. Like from the 70s or whatever. You can see a dollar and dimes and pennies, quarters. I mean, there's a little bit of everything. See playing cards, since he liked to gamble. Bottle of Jack Daniel's tequila, and some silk flowers there. What a grave he has here though, a little memorial. You can also see in the wrought iron here, people have carved their names kind of all over around in this iron fence. And they've even placed the year, like this says Andy 2015. See 2016s, all sorts of years and names right here. Doc Holliday was a well-known figure from the Old West. He was a dentist by trade, but was also a well-known gambler and gunslinger. John Henry Holliday, or Doc as he was later known, was born on August 14th, 1851 in Griffin, Georgia. His parents, Henry Burrell Holliday and Alice Jane Holliday, had already lost a daughter just 1 year prior named Martha. They also had an orphan boy named Francisco Hidalgo that Henry brought home following the Mexican-American War. Henry also served in the Cherokee Indian War and the Civil War. The family moved to Valdosta, Georgia in 1864, where Henry was a pharmacist. Doc's mother Alice died of consumption, which is now called tuberculosis, when he was 15 years old. Doc's cousin, Robert Holliday, founded the Pennsylvania College of Dental Surgery, which probably influenced him in following in his footsteps. At age 19 in 1870, he enrolled in the college and graduated in 1872 with a degree of Doctor of Dental Surgery. Doc was well educated. He knew Latin, and he also could play the piano. He was also well-mannered, which was attributed to his mother. Shortly after returning to the South to begin his dentistry career, he was diagnosed with tuberculosis. This was the very disease that had taken his mother just years prior. He then moved to Dallas, Texas, possibly for drier air, although the exact reasons are unclear. He did enter into the dental practice in Dallas, but all of his coughing and gagging over his patients did not go well. However, he did discover that he was pretty good at gambling. He made a living as both a player and a dealer. This is also when he started drinking heavily. In January of 1875, he traded gunfire with a saloon keeper named Charles Austin. No one was injured, but he was arrested and found not guilty. He then moved to Denison, Texas, but after being fined for gambling, he decided to move to Denver, Colorado. Once there, he found work as a faro dealer, and he got into an argument with a guy named Bud Ryan. The two men then drew knives and fought. Doc didn't kill him, but he left him severely mutilated. He then headed to Cheyenne, Wyoming to seek gold in 1876. From there, he went to Deadwood, South Dakota, and then on to Kansas, and finally back down to Texas in Breckenridge in 1877. He once again took up gambling, and he had a disagreement with a gambler named Henry Kahn. Doc beat him repeatedly with his walking stick, and they were both arrested. Kahn wasn't finished, though. Later that day, he came back after an unarmed Holliday and shot him. This seriously wounded him, and some thought he had even been killed. Once he had healed, he relocated to Fort Griffin, Texas. While dealing cards at John Shancy's saloon, he met Big Nose Kate. She was a dance hall woman and occasional prostitute who was just as stubborn as he was and also pretty fearless. The two of them would constantly butt heads and fight. They formed an on and off relationship that lasted for years. This saloon is also where Doc met Wyatt Earp for the first time. Wyatt was a U.S. Marshal that traveled from Dodge City, Kansas in pursuit of a train robber named David Rudabaugh. When Wyatt entered the saloon, he spoke to John Shancy, who told him to speak to Doc. So Wyatt did just that, and Doc informed him that Rudabaugh went back to Kansas. Wyatt shared this information over wire with Bat Masterson, and Rudabaugh was apprehended. This was the beginning of their long-lasting friendship between an unlikely pair. After about a month in Fort Griffin, Earp returned to Fort Clark, where he became the assistant city marshal to Charlie Bassett. In the summer of 1878, Doc and Big Nose Kate moved to Dodge City. Doc once again tried to get his dentistry business going there. But he couldn't stay out of the gambling halls, which was probably a good thing for Wyatt. Doc was in the Long Branch Saloon one night dealing cards when a number of cowboys entered Front Street with guns blazing and shooting out windows. They entered the saloon and started harassing customers. As Wyatt entered the saloon, he was met with pistols pointed at him. Two of the dozen cowboys were Toby Driscoll and Ed Morrison, who Wyatt had a history with. Doc had been watching everything from the back of the gambling saloon and came out of nowhere and pointed his pistol at Morrison's head. This forced the men to disarm, and Wyatt took them to jail. This cemented their relationship forever, and Wyatt credited Doc with saving his life that day. Doc moved around to several different locations where he tried repeatedly to get his dentistry business going. He was in several places in Colorado, New Mexico, Las Vegas, Nevada, and Texas. Each time his business suffered because of his failing health, so he always ended up back at the gambling tables. There are multiple reports of him killing men in different towns along the way. Doc is the type of historic figure where it becomes difficult to decipher the facts from fiction. Many of his exploits were printed in papers, and they may not all be true. For instance, like the time in Dallas when he was shot, they reported him dead. He eventually makes his way back to Dodge City, Kansas, where he finds out that his friend, Wyatt Earp, has moved on to some place called Tombstone, Arizona. Wyatt and several of his brothers moved there in hopes of striking it rich in silver. Reports vary on when and how Doc got to Tombstone, but regardless, he does make it there. The Earps had been there trying to make a living by prospecting on land claims that they had. Virgil Earp became the town constable there and had been in constant conflicts with Old Man Clanton and his gang of cowboys. They were rustling cattle deep into Mexico and throughout the territory. The Earps and the Clantons completely resented each other, so Doc was a welcome sight to see and have on the Earps' side. This conflict between the Earps and the Cowboys eventually led to the infamous gunfight at the OK Corral on October 26, 1881. This 30-second gunfight left 3 dead cowboys, Tom and Frank McLaury and Billy Clanton. Virgil was shot in the calf and Morgan was shot in the shoulder area. There were 2 newspapers in the town at that time, and each one had a different story as to what took place during the gunfight. The Earps and Doc were tried for murder, but there just wasn't enough evidence to convict them, and it was determined that they acted within the law. This prompted the cowboys to try and get revenge. They ambushed and shot Virgil Earp on December 28th while he was walking in between saloons. Morgan Earp was killed as he was playing billiards on March 18, 1882. After Wyatt started his infamous vendetta ride, Doc was a huge part of that. Together they took out those that they thought were responsible for the murder of Morgan Earp. Holliday spent his remaining days in Glenwood Springs, Colorado. He believed in the curative waters that were said to be there. At the same time, he still drank heavily. Doc died in Glenwood Springs on November 8, 1887 at 10 a.m. Supposedly, his last words were spoken to a nurse. "This is funny," he said, as he was lying in bed looking down at his feet. It was believed that he would be killed with his boots on, and since he was in bed, they were off. Doc was buried in the Linwood Cemetery, which overlooks Glenwood Springs. His exact location remains unknown and is a complete mystery. The ground may have been frozen at the time, and there could have been a lot of snow there, so it leaves several questions. Was his body transported to the top where the cemetery is? Was he buried in the hillside along the way because they couldn't make their way up? Digging a grave there would have been extremely difficult in the frozen, hard, rocky ground. Regardless, he was buried there somewhere in the hillside. So since his burial, there are also other questions that have come up. Is he even in the cemetery now? That's something we don't know and may never know. Doc's father Henry is rumored to have had his son exhumed and then transported back to Griffin, Georgia for burial. The exact location of where in Griffin, Georgia still remains a mystery, and it could be in one of two cemeteries. If you would like to know more on this mystery, check out my friend Ron over on his channel, Faces of the Forgotten. He has visited a couple of possible cemeteries where Doc could be located in and has done an excellent series on it. No matter what, Doc Holliday remains one of the largest Old West figures, and he's a legend in his own right. Now right beside his grave is this sign right here, and it is severely faded. And looks like there's something here originally, like a photo of some sort, and it is gone. It explains a little bit about his early history, who he was, and then his Glenwood days here. Stay tuned for another legendary Old West tale coming soon from this cemetery.